one of the things, just by way of tools, that can help companies with this, is one of the dangerous things we've allowed to happen to many innovation conversations is we get all hung up on conventional business metrics like net present value, just as an example. And one of the dangerous assumptions that a net present value mindset creates is that you're going to carry every project you start to its natural conclusion. And instead, what I would argue is you need to be looking at things in terms of option value. And let's say you budgeted $2.5 million for a program, and after, and my colleague Ryan McManus and I read a lot about this, and after 3-4 checkpoints, you say, wait a minute, we spent 120,000, but this is not the best use of our time, and you stop. My God, you should be rewarded for that. Instead of going on and spending the rest of the 2 million, you hand it back to the company. Maybe you get a pat on the back, and we all get to do something more productive. So I think it's very consistent with that way of thinking. Let's talk about innovation for a bit, and the word has gotten to be very buzzy. I think as executives sort of figure out that competitive advantages aren't going to carry them. And just as an aside, traditionally it is entirely possible to be an executive and never have touched innovation in your life. You were raised, you were promoted for being a great operator, keep the wheels on the bus, optimize, all that stuff. And now they're all sort of going, ooh, innovation. But I see an awful lot of what Steve Blank calls innovation theater out there. If you could sort of take 3 myths about innovation off the table, well, what would be your favorite targets?
I'll let Yves do the second one. I'll do the first one. My favorite myth is that, and it comes back to what we just discussed, is that you need to make big bets for big returns. Mm-hmm. And I like to know.
That's such an important point.
And Vinod Khosla, the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, famous investor, he has a good point. He says, and he does it for the startup world, but it's actually the same for corporate innovation. He says the more money you give a company, a startup, mm-hmm. the less likely they are to succeed. Now that sounds very counterintuitive, but the fact is if you give a company or a project too much money, what are they going to do? They're going to build their fantasy. Yep. They're going to execute a business plan, right? And that's a huge, huge mistake, because what you really want to do is start small, test immediately, and then adapt your value proposition and business model. Mm-hmm. And that's the big mistake that many large companies do. They want to make a big return and they invest big rather than spreading their portfolio.
Right. And one of the other things I would observe is we're seeing the exact same disease in the heavily funded VC startups, right? I mean, build a product market fit before you go invest in ping pong balls and kombucha machines and whatever else is the flavor of the day. And I think it's having all that resource that they get sloppy. They get sloppy. So Yves, you were going to take us through the second.
What's the second one? And then Rita, I want to hear from you, your biggest myth that you see.
Sure, we can do that.
I think another myth is that it's possible to manage an invention or exploration project as an execution project. So it means that you have an idea, you fix everything, you have a plan to reach this one, you accomplish this plan, and you are quite sure that you will reach the objective that you initially fixed. And I think for exploration, the culture is completely different. You need to be ready to experiment, to test, and to go back and to have this process, which is much similar to the startup process. And I think it's one of the big myths, especially for voluntary CEOs and executives, that we will do it.